Hi, I'm Curious Cass, and this is Curiosity Junkie. Today's guest is here to talk about budget and political reform. Please welcome Jeff Harper to the show.
Hi, Jeff Harper. How are you?
Doing well, Cassie. Great to see you again.
You too. It is so wonderful to connect with you, and I am excited to talk budget with you. Jeff and I met in Austin, Texas when I was traveling for work, and you were working on which edition at that time? I'm trying to remember. It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, I believe I was working on 2017 edition.
2017.
Yeah, and have since done 2018. And then when I was watching them pass the 2017 tax cut bill, I haven't done any further editions because I realized that the national psyche is just not there because the political climate is not ripe for deficit reduction. And so.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what brought you to wanting to create the budget book that you do.
The making of a budget nerd.
Yes.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Cold, rainy night in February of '87. I was doing laundry, and I'm a voracious reader from my early days, and so I rounded the corner to get something to read. And the book that I picked up was Triumph of Politics by David Stockman. Some older viewers will recall David Stockman was Reagan's budget director, and he was kind of a whiz kid. He was 34 years old when he became director of Office of Management and Budget for the Reagan administration. He later resigned after Reagan won re-election. He was concerned about the way the tax cuts went without the following with commensurate spending cuts, which was the original supply side plan. So consequently, he wrote a book, The Triumph of Politics, in '86. I read it, and that's where my concerns about the budget came from. There was an organization that sprang from that called United We Stand. We had a little local chapter in Fort Worth where I was, and we published a newsletter, and during the course of that, we were trying to relay more budget information. Problem. The budget is huge. I made copies last night just to give people a sense of the volume. And by the way, that's back to 95, those portions right there. Who's got time to wade through all that? It's online now, but it's overwhelming. Right. So the other thing, the numbers were too big. And so generally I thought, if I'm a taxpayer, just give me the facts. I just want to know how much is being spent for what, and I want it in a way that's digestible. So we went from reducing the budget down to this booklet. This actually in the first edition, but this was the original vision. Right. Was to do like a checkbook register, simply list the agency or program and list the number beside it, but take it one step further. Reduce the numbers down to size, because if I say $4 trillion, that doesn't mean much to most people. If I say $40,000, that does. And that's the basis of reduction is doing, rather than per capita, which changes the digits, I do pennies per million. So the digits don't change. 4 trillion goes to 40,000. And then there's a breakdown of that. In 4 trillion, by the way, I'm rounding up just to give a good round number. If I give a breakdown of all the different agencies and programs from that $40,000 mark, it's much more digestible for people. Right. So, okay.
Which is super helpful, because you're right. When you're talking money and you say 4 trillion, most of us can't even relate to that number. And so you probably just kind of check out a little bit mentally. So it's great that you take it down to a number that we can all relate to in a way. Yeah.
Well, that's the idea, in laying the numbers out in a digestible form in a checkbook register format. Right. And I've done 6 editions at this point. The first edition was actually used to teach a college course in public budgeting. And That's this one. And by the way, it was called Penny Mills checkbook back then because Penny Mills was a fictional character. Every time Uncle Sam spent $1 million, it cost Penny 1 cent. And so that's the reason for that title. But this was much more extensive. It's about 100 pages, and it's filled with text. I don't know how visible that is, but it. What happened with the advent of the internet, the text became unnecessary because now if you want to find out about NASA or National Institutes of Health, you can Google it up. So that was when I started reducing it down, and ultimately decided to expand the size to make it more readable. And this is the last thing I ended up with. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
But hopefully I relayed the gist of it. And it's taken a huge budget down to like a checkbook register.
Right. Absolutely.
It's just the idea.
I think that's beneficial for the masses. So for those of us who really, I understand budget, my own personal, but explain what exactly is the budget?
Well,
and income and expenses.
Okay, well, it's different at the federal level, and some people would argue that we need to go kind of ask members of Congress what is the budget, since they don't seem to pay a great deal of heed anymore. Mm-hmm. But, budgets are where we make priorities. And here's the thing about the federal level. They have capacities that we don't have in the form of whatever they authorize and appropriate in spending. Our nation's central bank, the Fed, will make the money available. They have a money printer. Now, they don't literally print cash if we go down and like we see used. It comes in the form of digital entries, computer keystrokes, and it enters through the banking system. So they don't have that discipline imposed on them. The budgeting process, the way it's supposed to work, the president introduces his budget plan first Monday in February. People will recall, some folks out there will recall, the Supreme Court convenes first Monday in October. Well, the budget gets introduced first Monday in February. It's tentative. Okay, that goes to Congress, where typically they toss it out on the White House lawn like a dead corpse. They ignore it. That's not altogether true, but I've heard it characterized that way.
Right.
And they will go through their proceedings. But here's a key point regarding that. And by the way, it's all supposed to come together before the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. We just ended the last fiscal year a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And the idea is to have it come together. What we've been running on is continuing resolutions, which are pretty much where status quo, keep it as it is. It's indicative of a malfunctioning Congress. But here's a key point in that regard. 2/3 of federal spending is like on autopilot. And that's in the form of your entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and what have you. I believe one of the questions that you had asked in a previous discussion was, what makes it so hard to cut the budget? Okay, here it is, and I'll give it to you in a nutshell.
Okay.
About 3/4 of the federal budget consist of these following things: your health care, Medicare, Medicaid, and different things. Social Security, largest single program in the budget, national defense, and net interest on the debt. And if anybody is proposing a plan that doesn't address those things for deficit reduction, they're just not being realistic. And where we are now was just unthinkable back when I first started. The idea of having the level of deficit that we have now, $3 trillion, that was unthinkable. And that's a huge number, I realize. And the bigger thing is what the level is relative to GDP. But I know I don't want to get things too complicated.
Keep it simple for me, please.
Yeah, well, I will try and do it this way. We're going to go where our denial takes us, and where our denial has taken us is into the money printing of the Fed. And ultimately, here's one for you. When does a nation reach its credit limit? Because most of us have credit cards, and we got 5,000 there, I got 10,000 there, that sort of thing. It's different if you can print money. So the short answer is a nation reaches its credit limit when it becomes counterproductive to print money. And typically that takes the form of inflation. And by the way, Cassie, since you were in Austin, I've become a billionaire. I should have told you that when we were talking last night. Well, here it is. And this is literally true. There's a $500 million right there. Are you able to see that? Okay. Do you see the country it's from?
I can't see it, but what is it?
It's Zimbabwe.
Oh, I love it.
And I've got another one laying around here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I figured this will tide me over for the weekend. But so this is crazy, but I'm going to use a wayward metaphor to illustrate a point. And I realize you're thinking, God, we're going all over the place. But I want people to get this, because, and we're well on track. We're kind of too far gone in some respects. But I'm going to use an example that's real extreme. Imagine that tomorrow morning when we woke up, there were planes flying overhead. And they were dumping out hordes of cash, as we know it, $20 bills, $100 bills, $50 bills, what have you. And everybody, of course, is running around scrambling, grabbing up all this cash. Here's the good news. Every homeless person in America is able to round up $1 million cash. Problem solved, right? What happens the next day? Here's what happens. It would induce chaos into the economic system. And I have an expression, the trouble with economics is people confuse it with money. Now, let's take a real life example where it didn't come from airplanes, but some people will recall seeing on the news a few years ago in Venezuela, where there were vendors and they were fanning out all this cash, and it was not worth anything. Do you recall that? Did you catch that on the news any? Yes. So anyway, so ultimately, when we're talking about the federal budget and getting things under control and on balance more, it doesn't have to be perfectly balanced. It needs to be taken down, the deficit. We're really talking about stabilizing the economy and having a place where people can come up with business ideas, have a sound economy, to go to a bank and try and secure a loan and know that they're not going to be blindsided by inflation or some kind of crash like we had in 2008. That's really what it's about, is creating a stable economy and also meeting priorities. Obviously, we want to do things, and we do some great things with the budget. That was one of the things in doing the booklet, where it wasn't all bad. I would see some things I would think, wow, that's been a success, or that's a good value. Yeah. Kind of took it all over the place there, Cassie. But
no, I get it. And that's the thing. I think when we're talking about this, is there are so many different avenues and directions it could literally go in. And my goal is really to keep this non-political and really just helping people like myself who are curious about the budget, what it is, how it works, what are some trends. And I think one question I have is, has it ever been balanced? Is it doable? Has there been a time when the budget was balanced, and when was it? Who did it? How did they do it? If you know.
Oh, absolutely. When I got involved, the last time had been 1969, and then it happened again in the late 90s. And to their credit, now let's give credit where it's due. The George Bush Sr. went back on his no new taxes pledge, and it caught all kinds of grief for that. But the reality is he did what I think most Americans want their elected officials to do, try and meet in the middle for the greater good. And he worked with the Democratic Congress, and they came up with a blend of spending reductions and tax increases. And we had a balanced budget for a couple of years there, I think in the late 90s. And then it all started unraveling in early 2000 with yet more tax cuts, along with the spending overseas on the war efforts and so forth. One quick point. The leading deficit hawk organizations, and by deficit hawk, you might be familiar with defense hawks, or people that are noted for wanting more defense spending, defense doves, less or more in the area of diplomacy. Well, in the budgeting world, deficit hawks means people concerned about deficits. And right now, the deficit hawk community favors more spending in light of the COVID crisis. And so it's not where we're always against spending. We just want it to be responsible. And when the opportunities arise, we get back to bringing the deficit down. It never has to be perfectly balanced. It just needs to be brought down to where it's manageable.
Right. So right now, how bad is it?
It's so bad.
But
okay. Yeah, I'm going to confuse things more, but hopefully I'll give people some cues where they can, if they're really interested, they can do like what I used to do. I would watch a show like this, and I would pick up a few clues, and then I'd go do the research work myself. I think we've reached a point where we're going to have some money printing continue in order to maintain a safety net. And it will only be when we start to get inflation or some kind of economic dislocations that people start to rant about, where's this coming from? And that hasn't happened in a way that's visible yet. And, we haven't had the deal, and we won't have the deal like they had in Venezuela or Zimbabwe. We're a little bit different. The U.S. dollar is the world's currency. We have some advantages, but we're playing our cards pretty thin these days. So here's what I see. I think what we're going to have is we're going to print money until we have inflation reach a point where people really get upset and they say, what's causing this? The problem with that is it's kind of too late to stop inflation, because it tends to run way past by the time you start to address it. So that's the course we're on, at which point people will start to say, okay, how do we reduce things and get things back in order? But deficit hawks have by and large accepted that. And also accepted that we might have to have yet more. We can't just overnight balance a budget. That would be insane. It would wreck the economy. It's got to be incremental. And if you get it on a downward trajectory, the deficit, just like if you're in a household and you were reducing your debt a little at a time, well, that changes the whole dynamic. You don't have to wipe it out overnight. And let me let you ask a question, Cassie. Then I want to speak to what has happened with the Fed and the policies regarding the division between rich and poor, because I think...
go ahead.
Okay.
They kind of tend to flow with what we're thinking. So
I mentioned David Stockman. He also wrote a book that in 2014, and it looks like I've been carrying it around like a Bible in the countryside, because it looks like you see how ragged it is. But Stockman, I disagree with him on some things. I think he's a little hard on Fed officials, but nonetheless, more so than any other person. And if there were only $2 I could recommend for people, I'd recommend Stockman's The Triumph of Politics to see kind of how this started in 1980. And certainly there was deficit spending before that with LBJ and so forth, that era. But it's fascinating. It's as fascinating as it is troubling. And then this book that he released in 2014 is called The Great Deformation, or Deformation, however you want to pronounce it. And this is how crazy things have gotten. Stockman actually advocates for a wealth tax, a one-time wealth tax. This is Reagan's budget director. And it's not because he's any lefty or big government socialist. It's not that at all. The reason is because he recognizes the vast transfers of wealth that have taken place by way of monetary policy, not fiscal policy. The Democrats will talk about the tax cuts and this, that, and other, and the fiscal policy and how we need more of this. Here's the untold story. Most of the wealth transfer has taken place by way of monetary policy. And that policy has been, here's something people can write down and Google up. The Cantillon effect. Now, the Cantillon effect is the name, that was an economist back in the 18th century. And simply put, it's where when new money is created and enters the system, it disproportionately benefits the upper classes because they are able to access that money to make more money. Just think banks, corporations, what have you. And so it's called the Cantillon effect. So imagine you're a Fed official, and here you are. You're trying to maintain the economy for the sake of the whole, but in so doing, your policy disproportionately enriches the upper classes. And that's kind of a pattern we've been in for a long time. On my website, if people want to see some riveting video, I think anyway, they can click on the benchmark tab, and you will see Alan Greenspan visiting with Richard Fisher and Larry Lindsay. And these old guys are sitting around. It will seem very abstract and disconnected to people, but they will get the gist of it and the concerns.
Let's do your website real quick, and I'll scroll it in the video, and then I'll also put it in the description. So what website would they go to?
It's UncleSam'sCheckbook.com.
That's easy.
Yeah, and it's easy to reach me too. Just email Jeff Harper at UncleSam'sCheckbook.com. And I know you'll put that later on, add that in. Yeah. And so anyway, people who are older will remember the Volcker era. And when interest rates, Cassie, you remember this. We're both real estate agents, although we became agents after this, I guess. But you remember when interest rates were up around, the prime rate was up around 20%? That would obliterate the federal budget. Now, that's not going to happen. But what has happened is the Fed has intervened to artificially suppress interest rates. Now, I know I'm getting way too crazy here, but I'm going to try and simplify it and ask people to imagine a jack-in-the-box where you're trying to suppress interest rates, but in so doing, you're pressing down on the spring. And it's like the spring is becoming more and more, it's developing more and more tension to where if you ever let it out, it becomes devastating. With interest rates skyrocket, it blows the budget, creates chaos. And so that's why I say that we're going to have, it seems to me, some blend of continuing to print money along with making hard choices to reduce the deficit. And I mentioned those items. The hard choices, healthcare is complicated. There's no need to get into that because it's already been discussed to the hilt. But in my view, has long been we're going to collapse into some kind of system like in Europe and what have you, where they have more government control. Social Security is easy, relatively speaking, because it's not, we know how many people will be retiring, what year, and all that sort of thing. That's easy. National defense is where Eisenhower's admonition has come to fruition, and that being, some people will recall when he gave his farewell address, he warned of a military-industrial complex. Well, we've been here for a long time, and what form that takes is where we have 435 members of the House, and every one of them, chances are, has some kind of military installation in their district. So when these appropriations bills come to the floor, it's not so much where they're voting defense, they're voting economic interest of their district. So what we need to do to address defense, in my view, and by the way, I had the good fortune of posing this question to two former House budget chairs, Charlie Stenholm and Jeb Hensley. One's Democrat, one's Republican. It's on a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago. I love Zoom. And what I proposed is, I said, why not do something where we have, like the base closing commission, you have a panel of experts on defense convene, they formulate the plans, they submit them, and members of Congress vote up or down on different plans. For one thing, beyond what Eisenhower warned about, and I didn't even get into general contractors, or excuse me, defense contractors and their campaign donations, how they donate masses of money. I didn't even get into that. But in order to address what he worried about and make sure that we have the defense we need, we really need to restructure it. It's way too complicated now to have members of Congress managing that. So that would be a way to cut defense spending rationally. Yeah, well, and let's put ourselves in the position of a member of Congress. It's political suicide to go against these things. If you do it, then there's going to be somebody that's going to come and say, oh, they voted against Bell Helicopter or General Dynamics or whoever it is, and they're going to lose a litany of votes. And so that's the reality. We have to sympathize with members of Congress, but we have to be realistic about what's driving defense spending. And nobody, it's kind of like the old soft on crime thing. Nobody wants to be accused of being soft on crime. Nobody wants to be seen as deemed naive for not, and everybody wants to support the troops. So it's just a quagmire that we should rely upon defense experts, highly regarded in a transparent process, to formulate different defense plans and then have members vote up or down. And we've already done that with the base closing commission. When we were getting our Cold War dividend, the Cold War ended, we were going to see big cuts, right? Well, we didn't. It just continued to go upwards. So
I think there's so much that the average American really doesn't know about. We don't dive into it. We don't dig in. We're not that curious about the budget. We know that things are a mess when they're a mess. We know things are good when they're good because we feel it in our own pocketbook. One question that kind of came up in conversation last night was, are the rich paying their fair share?
Shared sacrifice is a term that is used. And yes, they definitely need to pay more. When I was watching C-SPAN in the 2017 tax cuts, I felt nauseous. So that should tell you something. Right. I'm a working class guy. I put on the blue collar sometimes and fix up old properties, do handyman, and put on the white collar and sell real estate occasionally. And from a vantage point of both of those things, there's something I am before either of them, and that's American. And as you know, in real estate, the mortgage interest deduction is something that they lobby for all the time and they covet and so forth. The reality is it subsidizes bigger houses is the net effect of it, and it generates bigger commissions for agents like us. So consequently, the industry advocates for it. But it's not in the best interest of the nation anymore. We have roughly 200 tax breaks, complicates the lives of millions of Americans who have small businesses, frustrating to the hilt. We should simplify the tax code. Yes, I don't believe the rich are paying the fair share because of what I mentioned about the Cantillon effect. It doesn't have to do with fiscal policy, it's monetary policy. And I've deferred to people that are far more knowledgeable, and I mentioned David Stockman he's no lefty, but he recognizes what's happened there. Wealth tax is very hard to implement, by the way, because big money is mobile money. And some of the studies, which I'm not acquainted with them all, but generally what you see is offshoring and so forth. But there's a way to capture more money, and it should be done. And the people to talk to, you Warren Buffett, you Bill Gates, they advocate for that. And Bill Gates' father, I remember Bill Gates Sr., not Jr., who we're accustomed to seeing, wrote a great article concerning the estate tax, and where he was saying, this doesn't serve my personal interest, but it's the right thing to do. And
well, I was having a conversation the other day, and there's so much right now, party-wise, Republican versus Democrat, and I feel like the hate is so strong right now on social media on both sides. It's amazing how it gets to that point when we if we could just all take a step back and think about, this is all supposed to be for the people, and politics tends to be for the party. And how do we get everyone thinking budget wise for really what's best for the people? And I think on average, most, and I say most, not all, politicians go into politics to create change. And then they're hit with all the stuff that happens. And, you know, they do want to balance a budget, but in order to balance this, they got to put something over here or do, you know, cave in on this. And so it becomes all out of whack, I guess. But when I guess I'm just always a very inclusive person, and I would love for everything to be more about what is best for the people and not just certain classes. And I'm just kind of ranting right now.
No, it's okay. Actually, Cassie, what you're bringing to light an excellent point, and that is, I believe there's an expression in the computer industry: garbage in, garbage out. Mm-hmm. And as best I can infer, it means if you feed in bad data, you're going to get a bad result. If we have a rotten political process, we're going to get a bad result. And we do have a rotten political process. And this is something that I've watched deteriorate from becoming a fervent activist in '92. And there was a time I could pick up the phone and I could call and do a forum involving Republicans and Democrats, and it was kind of a matter-of-fact accepted thing. Now it's more the kind of thing where they don't want to be in the same room, you know, and so consequently, we have a lot of get-togethers that will have a handful of R's and D's, Republicans and Democrats, along with Greens and Libertarians and Independents. My view is, and this is a personal view, that we need to evolve into a multi-party system like you see in other nations. And a good way to do that, there's two major reforms. Ranked choice voting. When you go into a voting booth, instead of just checking one box, you number your preferences for candidates, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, wow.
First of all, yeah, it's easy. First of all, it saves taxpayer money because you don't have to have runoffs, and not to mention the hassle of going to vote again. Secondly, it makes someone more apt to vote for a libertarian or a green or an independent than they otherwise would be, where they're told all the time, spoiler vote, wasted vote. Yeah. Well, I'm tired of hearing that. And it's a simple solution, ranked choice voting. And incidentally, there's a bill that's been introduced in the Congress to help make that transition. And to their credit, I always like to give credit to brave, courageous, principled leaders, and one of those is Michael Bennet in Colorado, the senator. He's co-sponsor of that bill for ranked choice voting. That doesn't earn him a lot of good points from his own party, probably. And Dean Phillips in the House, and then there's an independent in the Senate from Maine, Angus King. So they're good people trying to move things in that direction. Yeah. The other thing, a major reform that if it doesn't happen, I think we're doomed. I really do. It's gerrymandering. Are you familiar with gerrymandering? That gosh awful term. Okay.
Like, okay, wait, what is that? I know I've heard.
But gerrymandering goes back to 1812. There was a politician named Eldridge Gerry up in Massachusetts. He wanted to ensure his reelection, so he drew his district we are doing the census now, where we will allocate seats among the different states. Like Texas is expected to go from 36 to 39 or 40. So we had to redraw these boundaries. Well, if you're a politician and you want to be reelected, don't you want to get that pen and say, oh, I want to draw in these Republicans over here, and then I want to go way out here. So you get these arcane looking figures. Yes. And the Eldridge Gerry, the figure resembled a salamander, and that's consequently how the name came about, gerrymandering. So, and by the way,
fun fact,
that is such an important issue. And again, I want to give credit where it's due. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Eric Holder are working together. People can pull this up. So if they just Google in gerrymandering and Arnold and Eric Holder, it'll pop up. Mm-hmm. And they recognize the importance of this. Former President Obama, this is what he's made his calls. And people don't see this in the dynamics of Congress, but sometimes the sitting president will fight more against their own party to get the votes than they will the opposing party. And they don't have much leverage because the districts will be so drawn to the extreme, so far Democrat or Republican, that the members of Congress are not compelled to meet in the middle. Yeah. They can just throw red meat to the extremes and get reelected. And so we need to draw more balanced districts. And in order to do that, there's a simple way. We have redistricting commissions, citizens redistricting commissions. And California has one, Arizona has one, and Iowa's done it for decades. And so it can be done. And that will go a long ways towards ending the divisiveness or reducing the divisiveness.
Right. I wonder why some states have it and some don't. Like, what is that just?
Well, here's the thing. It's come about by petitioning, citizens initiative. And here in Texas, I'm in a coalition where we're trying to do this. But Texas, the state, does not have the right to for statewide initiative and referendum. So we're relying upon lobbying the legislature, which is a tall order. Ultimately, what it comes down to is awakening the broader public. And here's the good news. You will find a great deal of agreement amongst Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and Greens and Independents when it comes to political reform. The obscene amount of dark money in this election, I mean, it's crazy. It has gotten so beyond the pale that you can find agreement there. And that's when I'm on Facebook, sometimes I feel like I'm wasting my time, but I'm actually kind of doing a case study to see what people respond to. Right. You know, like using them for guinea pigs. But in a good way, but it's really comical to know all the parties involved. Like I have my friends in Texas and my old friends in Louisiana, and I see them badgering at each other. Yeah. But what I see as a unifying factor is political reform. So that's ultimately our salvation. And if you're concerned about the environment or whatever other issue, what you find if you become active is none of it matters unless we clean up the system. Yes. We have got to clean up the system. Clean up our political system, make the Fed operations more transparent, because it's going to have to be a little bit like FDR's fireside chats, where we start to gradually walk our nation back onto sound financial footing.
Yes. So, I just kind of, in my head, I go, what are the chances for political reform? And I don't want to dive too deep into it. It's just a thought. And most of the conversations I'm having with people around politics is that is the one common theme that seems to come up when we are having conversations around it, is the political reform, that it needs to change. We need to clean it up. It needs to get back to for the people and what it should be. What do you think the chances are that happens in our lifetime? Because we're older, I'm like, my kids, my grandkids hopefully will see it because they are pushing and more are questioning. But what are your thoughts?
First of all, I want to say with regard to the leaders of the major parties, the Republicans and Democrats, they're like spouses in a divorce. They know better than anybody what's going on, but they're the least apt to tell you. It has to come from the bottom, and people are starting to get it. And where you will become involved, Cassie, is when you see what it leads to if we don't reform with regard to your children and grandchildren.
Right.
You will become so angry, you will be marching on the state capitol saying enough of this, and whatever it might be, term limits, campaign finance reform. So it has to reach that point. What it will take in the United States is for people to really get fed up with all the corruption and so forth. And it's right before us. It goes on right beneath your nose, and it's because you're not going to the town hall meetings, you're not paying attention, and you're buying into a lot of wayward conspiracy nonsense. The reality is all this has happened, and I don't want to criticize people for not following politics like I do. That's unreasonable. Generally, the way politics works is we will defer to people. We have a republic where we elect people to go represent our interests. And so if somebody seem like a reasonable person, knowledgeable, and going to do the right thing, I'm going to vote for them. Okay, here's when the system becomes so polluted that to become a viable candidate, you have to go beg for the special interest money and pander to all these donations. With your 1, 2, 3 voting, a candidate has to get a majority. So if they don't get over 50% of the number 1 votes, you go to your number 2 votes. And if you don't get over 50%, you go to your number 3 votes. By that time, most elections are going to be resolved. But what it does, it takes away that don't waste your vote over there for that candidate. It takes that away. So and if we got more balanced districts, I think you'll start to see it happen. So,
yeah, and I think that's the biggest shame is we really are forced to pick between 2 parties. And to me, that's not how it should be. It should be all the parties represented, and we should be able to pick without feeling like we're throwing a vote away, because that's what it feels like. Even when I talk in small group, limited politics, and if you say you're not voting for a Democrat or Republican, people go, well, you're just throwing your vote away. And because we are human, you go, oh, well, I don't want to waste my vote. Then I got to vote for or against whichever party. And that's, I go, it's so frustrating.
Well,
but I do feel like things need to change, and it does start with us. We have to start talking about it in a calm and respectful way and come together and really ask for that political reform. I think that's where it starts.
We've got a challenge, and it's as frustrating for some of the members in the House and Senate as it is for the people.
Sure.
What has happened is we've had power concentrate to, I heard Senator Cassidy from Louisiana describe it as the 4 corners. And what he meant was the leaders of the major parties in both the House and Senate. And the donations, the flow of money to them, they have leadership PACs, and this will all be way too complicated to get into initially, but there's some great organizations out there. I'm going to name just one that people can get to. It's called Represent Us, and that's they're getting a lot of traction now on Facebook, and they put out good little snippets that makes it easy for people to understand.
Are there any trends, if we're talking about budget and someone's trying to pay attention to it, political reform may be happening slowly? I think there is probably an undercurrent growing for budget. What would someone kind of pay attention to if they were...
that's easy. I can give for the budget. Of course, they can contact me, and I'll give my biased opinion. What I try and do, by the way, Cassie, I try and serve like a little bridge. I try and bridge people's understanding.
Right.
The leading organizations in the deficit hall community are the Concord Coalition.
Okay.
They're easy to find, concordcoalition.org, and originated by two senators, former senators, and it's a great organization. So those are great sources of information on the budget. Regarding the political reform, I just mentioned Represent Us. There's a litany of political reform groups. There's fairvote.org. That's a good one on ranked choice voting. If you Google up fairvote.org.
Okay.
And I'm in an organization, by the way, if there are any Texans that watch this video, I'm on the board of directors of the League of Independent Voters of Texas, and political reform is high on our agenda. And one of the great things, by the way, it's kind of fun, Cassie, and people need to hear this. One of the most rewarding things in being an activist is meeting good people from different camps. We've had some meetings before. One of my colleagues is one of the best there is about putting people of different persuasions together in the same room. We have a good time. We argue policy, we and what have you, but it's in a very respectful way. And then we go eat lunch, then we resume work. And the idea of not bouncing a policy idea off of somebody of a different belief, that just wouldn't cross my mind. I have had a number of friends who are different in their views, and I'll say, Charlie, what do you think about this? And I'll run it by him, and of course he'll tick me off, and we'll hash it out. But occasionally I'll change my mind, and Charlie will change his mind. And so, and those things are very, very heartening when you're able to do that. We had to get back to that climate of where we have genuine dialogue and we have compromise. We can do this.
Absolutely. I do think it's doable. And I wish that we could get to that point where we can sit down and have conversations with people of the opposite view and maybe help us understand why the opposite might be a viable way to look at it. And I love that you are in groups that are doing that. And I wish that there was more of that on a bigger, higher level. And hopefully that is something that we come to. Because I'm so glad you said this, Cassie, because this is a point I wanted to work in here. What has evolved in our politics is our legal adversarial system has made its way into politics. For one thing, look at the ratio of lawyers, and some of the people I admire the most are the lawyers, or lawyers. But right.
I think
we're not saying anything negative about lawyers at all.
Right. But we have a disproportionate number in our Congress and state legislature. But here's the bigger point: they operate in an adversarial system. It's very manipulative. Anybody that's been through a divorce or some kind of proceeding, and I know people that have said, we wanted to have an amiable divorce, but the lawyers wouldn't let us talk to each other. That's made its way into our politics. It's always been that way, but it's really become intensified with the 24-hour news cycle and all this. And so we don't, what our elected officials should be are teachers of their constituents. Now they're manipulators of our constituents, and that's in a republic. It's supposed to be where you have a member of Congress come back and they say, "Here's what's going on, folks," and they have a town hall. They describe the challenges and say, "What are y'all's thoughts?" And then they assimilate that information and go back and cast a vote. And but we've gotten away from that, and it stems from our legal adversarial system having made its way into our political realm. But incidentally, that's another reason why I feel so strongly about a multi-party system and 1, 2, 3 voting. If you had in the debates, if they had to speak more towards number 2 votes or number 3 votes, it changes the whole dynamic of what they're going to say. We've got to reform the politics, and then the budget will follow.
Yeah. I think that's the big thing is if we're really looking to help make a difference in the budget and getting it to where it is for the people and helping the people, then we have to try to make a difference in the political reform piece and revamping that. And I would love to see young blood getting in there, not just a bunch of old white men. Yeah, I think change has to happen, and it's on us as the people to kind of push to make that happen and not settle for a two-party representation that, to me, really doesn't represent the people right now. I'm not saying it didn't, but I think we've gotten so far off track politically that it is not about what the people need and the people want. It's about what the powers that be want. And I could be way off track there, and I'm sure somebody's going to call me out.
No, you're right on track.
Personal opinion.
You're exactly on track. It is much easier if you want to go to the extreme and say sinister big money interest, which I think that's few, but nonetheless, it's much easier to control two parties than it is multi-parties. And it's quite easy for them when you have so many districts gerrymandered. They don't have to worry about those districts for 10 years at a time. Mm-hmm. But there was something else you touched upon that I wanted to say, but where I'm saying, I know what I wanted to say. I wanted to tell a little story about Cassie Brown because I think you would make a wonderful public servant. I really do.
Oh my.
Well, no, this is the kind of thing. It's not genius that's lacking in DC. Some issues are complicated, but typically you're going to have, we defer on all kinds of decisions in our daily lives. We have to in an information age, but you want somebody that's capable of synthesizing that information and making a decision. And usually you have decisions that are, the choices have been ferreted out real well and refined before you have an opportunity to vote on them. So right. You just want people with a good heart and a level head. Yes. Cassie Brown, way cool Cassie Brown, I've dubbed her. When she allowed me to spread my budget booklets everywhere so I could bring some order to all those pages, I left her some money to compensate her for. And what does she do? She hides it in one of my big budget booklets, and I get a text message saying I didn't want to take that money. And so that's just so viewers know that's way cool, Cassie Brown. Uh-huh. And I will the money will arrive. You won't know.
No, I don't want that. It was me helping you. It's my way of contributing to the cause. So take it as my donation to helping you get your book out. Because I find it fascinating that you are so committed and passionate about the budget and political reform and just politics in general. It is not something that I like to spend time in. And I think it's because it feels like negative. And it would be lovely to where if we could reform it and get it to where it's a conversation and it might get heated, but it's respectful and we're really just having conversations about what we would like to see. And maybe you go, oh, okay, yeah, well, I see how that would work. And maybe what I'm thinking wouldn't work. I would just love for it to get back to something like that. So keep doing what you're doing.
We can do that. And what's ultimately going to happen, by the way, we're going to have what I call a collapse to local because the federal government's going to become impotent at the point that we have inflation. So we have to have those networks where people go out and meet other people in their community and make sure that the most vulnerable citizens among us have their basic needs met. That's vitally important. And that's more about communications than it is money, because there's no reason for anybody to go hungry or without shelter. Cassie, I want to do a plug real quick for your show, because I know we both love animals. And my dogs and cats and horses, all animals. Any booklets that anybody orders, and I'm going to make them half price since they're old. But the information, by the way, it doesn't change that dramatically from year to year. So if they order 2018 editions, they're going to have the spending relative to, they're going to have a good view of the spending. It's not going to be that much different, aside from the special COVID spending. So all the donations, if they say Cassie Brown, all the donations go to animal rescue for any booklets. So I got to cover my costs, my mailing costs. But if they order 10 booklets, $50 minus postage will go to animal rescue. And you name the group, so if there's one in Arizona, because it doesn't matter to me if it goes to dogs in Arizona or dogs in Texas, as long as it goes where it needs to go.
Yes, okay? Absolutely. I love that. I love that you're so connected to rescues and taking care of the animals. I think it's great.
That's getting to where bad. Sometimes I want to give up on the budget, the politics, and just take care of the dogs.
Absolutely.
Really. So, but
the people.
It's there are those days, and but the reality is, and we know this, the good people in the world, network with them, cultivate, and do the best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, Harper, thank you so much for coming on. I will put all of the connection links to you and how to get your book in the YouTube video, as well as the description. And again, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you talking today.
Well, thank you. We rambled. I rambled around the place, but I think I gave maybe fodder for a few provocateurs in there where people can follow up.
Yes,
okay?
Yeah, I think it's good. Okay. We maybe sparked somebody to go down a path maybe they weren't going to go down before watching this. So I appreciate that.
Good deal. I hope so.
Yes.
Because we can make it happen.
Thank you all for tuning in, watching, listening. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you next week. Bye.